Thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Today's not going to be much of a public transport episode, it's going to be much more of an urbanism episode, and it's going to be about different models of urban sprawl and growth, which I mean how cities expand horizontally, which all of them do. One of my colleagues at the Marin Institute, Solly Angel of the Atlas of Urban Expansion, has been very adamant about this, that he keeps giving advice to urbanist leaders in developing countries, and points out to them that the horizontal extent of their city has grown and how they're going to plan for it, and they're all under the assumption it's not happening or it's not going to happen. So much of it is about measuring the urban extent of various cities. Now, I don't actually know if this is all the cities or if it's just Zoom. No, it's not intended to be a 100% exhaustive collection, but it is. You can kind of see that it's a pretty broad case, and one of them is like Gainesville. Like it's not. I mean, it's not just very large or dense cities that they're studying, and so can't wait for me to bash Shanghai for their overt land prices as cities expand. I actually don't know that much about how it works in China, with the exception of the hukou system, and I thought Shanghai had an attempt to cap its own population because they didn't want too many rural migrants or something, but that's about the extent of my knowledge of these issues in China. So anyway, no. So I'm gonna open with Paris, just because Paris is, first of all, it's a very well-known city to urbanists, and also I think that in a lot of ways, it is normal. By the way, another city that I think people overrate how special it is, and in many ways it is normal, is New York. Many things about New York, obviously not the density and not the high extent of public transportation, but other urbanist matters of New York, I think, are actually very typical of an American city, like the interplay between white flight, poverty donuts. I don't know how well known the poverty donut is. I never remember if it's in Fake is the New Real or Radical Cartography, so we're going to check both. Yeah, it's Radical Cartography. So poverty donut is the idea that in the center, you have a wealthy center. Poverty around it is a. I mean, New York. It's not. New York is kind of broken by water, so it's not like perfectly horizontal, but you can kind of see poor. Not as poor these days, but 2006, this was poor. Jersey City gentrification is recent. And then beyond this poverty donut of these inner city neighborhoods that are not city center or close enough to city center to have gentrified, or in the case of the Upper East Side to have never declined. And then wealth in the suburbs. But it's also interacting with directionality, where some directions are richer than others. So, for example, toward Westchester, North Shore, the South Shore of Long Island is much poorer. The suburbs going due west of Newark are rather wealthy. The ones going toward the Jersey Shore, not so much. Chicago, of course, same thing. City center, kind of a poverty donut, but again, directionality, rich north, poor south. west is more urban model. Anyway, so in the same way, so it's important on this and a lot of other things, including almost most, not all, but most race relations issues. New York is very typical, and in the same way, so, oh, my head is covering the diagrams. Okay, so this is New York again. So, fuck this shit. This is New York again. Roughly the poverty donut. LA is kind of different. LA is more directionality. Chicago is the next. But again, rich north, poor south, but also past the north side you do get some not very rich places, and conversely on the west side it is very much gentrified core and the West Loop, west side poverty, suburban, middle class. And yeah, so anyway, we don't need this. So New York is emblematic of this kind of interplay between these two models in the United States. People think it's atypical because partly public transit, partly because of this kind of counter elite snobbishness that, oh my god, that New York is not real America. Real America is this tiny town of 70,000 people where you should never say anything in case the son of the school principal bullies you, because then you will be run out of town. Yeah, LA lacks a rich center, but again, that is a map from 18 years ago. An important part of American. Let's just anchor to this. You don't need to see an important part of American urban patterns is that the poverty donut is moving outward. Both the inner and the outer limit are moving outward. So I mentioned that in Jersey City there's been gentrification recently. Again, the map where just showed is from 18 years ago. Likewise, downtown LA. Gentrification built itself from the center actually. Anyway, on that same topic, in many ways, Paris is certainly emblematic of Europe, and I would argue in some cases, not just Europe, but some global patterns. So Paris has income maps, but I don't have them. I last saw an income map in Paris 7 years ago. It was early 17. I was playing with a time-limited license for ArcGIS that had income mapping. So Paris has a very well-known and I think overrated rich city, poor suburbs pattern. The city is snobbish against the suburbs, but that is not purely a matter of wealth, in the same way that New York is snobbish toward the suburbs, who New Yorkers mock as bridge and tunnel folks, B&T folks. So you will hear quite a lot of left critics of Giuliani in the 90s and 2000s say, oh, Giuliani was governing for the B&T folks. Likewise, a lot of New York City sneering at New Jersey occurs in an environment in which, yeah, sure, New Yorkers may sometimes overly focus on the parts of Jersey that are visibly gritty, like Bayonne or the Jersey Shore or Newark, but New Yorkers are aware that Jersey has rich suburbs. Thank you very much. So the city sneers at the suburbs. This is again a pattern that is not purely a matter of wealth. The city is wealthier than the suburbs in Paris. I want to specify, but not necessarily all suburbs. Whether Paris is richer than its western suburbs, so Hauts-de-Seine and Yvelines, depends on the measure of income that you use. I've seen some measures by which Paris is the richest department in France per capita, and some by which it is number 2 or 3, behind again Yvelines and Hauts-de-Seine. Paris has a much stronger pattern of directionality, possibly the purest rich west, poor east, or rather rich west and south, poor east and north. Pattern in existence, and the and likewise the way that the city has sprawled, I think, is kind of typical. And there are several patterns here, in one of which Paris is not at all typical, namely BNT. I said not BMT, BNT. Yeah. Can mass transit pave the dichotomy between BD, you mean bridge and tunnel folks, and central city dwellers? Well, I'm currently hovering on Paris, which has a very large mass transit network covering not just the city, but also its suburbs, especially the inner suburbs. So the model split in Paris is 64%, and in the inner suburbs it is less than that. It's like in the 40s. And I have this somewhere here, and I can see all of the... No. It's going to be in downloads. And and now you can see random files of like budgets and such. Don't actually mean anything. So these are the model splits by department. Mass transit is the fifth one, column M. This is, by the way, if you're wondering about the... What am I doing, YouTube? About the source. This is from this is an old database by INSEE where I think as of 2014, and I will flash the... So you want to look at the blog post called Off-Peak Public Transport Usage, and then there's a link, France. This is, again, it's a table that is uploaded on at my place just because it has, is the fact that they are related to not doubling? No. So yeah, often the case is that the crowding from the poor direction to city center is worse than from the rich direction, both because rich people move to where the transport is more convenient and because perhaps civic elites build things for the middle class and not for the poor. This is, for example, very much the case in Tokyo. Tokyo is exactly the same as Paris in this sense. So there's both the rich city, poor suburbs and something. I think that's actually much stronger in Tokyo than in Paris, that pattern. But also directionality, with the same directions, roughly. So mostly rich west-south, poor northeast. And the most crowded rail lines into Tokyo generally come from the east. So the Tozai line is much more crowded coming from the east than from the west. The Chuo Sobu line is much more crowded coming from the east than from the west. It's not a perfect pattern, but it is there. The case of the RER B and D in Paris is different. So the RER B and D is not being turned from double track to quadruple track because it is viewed as an investment in the core, and the preference in Ile-de-France right now is for investments to be purely suburban. So only build things within the suburbs. Now they are doing investments for suburb to city commuters. For example, there are so the lengthening of M14 is partly city. Again, it's almost entirely in the suburbs, the construction, but it's part of Grand Paris Express. But this did tie into a line that goes through the city, and it's a relief line for M13. They're also automating M13 to, among other things, create more capacity. M13 being not the busiest line, that would be M1, but M13 is the most crowded at rush hour. It goes from like here, like this is M13. So the two branches are extraordinarily crowded just because there's a much stronger home to work element here that does not exist for M1 or M4, which are the busier lines. So they are addressing some of the capacity issues, but the preference is to build within the suburbs and not try to cement a people live in suburbs and work in the city mentality. It's something that is reality, but people in Paris is sadly not atypical in it, try to reject that reality and impose a different reality of living and working everywhere. So they, for example, try to build more offices in more residential parts of the city. For example, near where I lived, they built a new combined Ministry of the Interior building in the bus terminal right around here. Yeah, it's this building. There's a bus garage there and also a building that is surprisingly pretty for this kind of modern architecture. But this is like the outer end of the city. It's difficult to get there by public transportation. I guarantee you that the management here drives. And probably has a dedicated car parking. And so that's why they're not doubling the BND. There's this European urbanist mentality that it is bad to provide more transport capacity to the core. It's not about whether it's poor or rich people. There have been people who claim that the second S-Bahn tunnel in Munich will make the city more monocentric, and this is a bad thing because something equity and requires mitigations. No. We can maybe tell that the monocentric city has relatively good access from everywhere, which is true of the center of Paris, for example, or center of London, center of Tokyo. And then, sure, if you build an office here, then technically it's more accessible from here than from here, but in practice, the workers live here and drive. So you haven't actually gained very much, or anything. So, yeah, it's not about the income matter. It does not have good bus connections because by definition a good bus is not a bus that is in the city of Paris. The city of Paris has very slow traffic. Bus average speeds there are, I don't remember how low. Yeah. Yeah. This is the average speed of buses in Paris. This is after many years of a transit-first policy within the city, or walkability first, or bikeability first. Like, after this many years of Delanoë and Hidalgo, yeah. This is what I'm saying, that if there's a bus garage, it does not matter how frequent the bus is. Walking is more frequent and not significantly slower. Should Paris invest in bus-only lanes on them? Yeah, sure. The thing is, Parisian boulevards are very wide, but they're rarely contiguous enough with their width. So here's an example. I've tried to retro crayon a world in which Metro Line 1 was built with 4 tracks, because Cour de Vincennes is extremely wide. Boulevard Diderot is also pretty wide. This is wide. Likewise, Champs-Élysées is a very, very wide boulevard, but then in between, on Rivoli, it is not wide enough for 4 tracks unless you stack them. So the Parisian boulevards are wide, but they're wide at the scale of pedestrians. They're not wide at the scale of they're not wide at the scale of motorized transport of any kind, because because they just don't stay wide all the way. You're always going to have narrows. So I forget what the ridership on the buses within the city is. I want to say something like 300 million, like something ridiculously low. And bear in mind that the metro serving largely just the city. I mean, also the suburbs to an extent, but nearly all of the ridership comes from the city. The metro has almost the same ridership as New York City Transit and the New York City subway pre-corona. I'm pretty sure it's ahead of New York now post-corona because Paris has had better recovery. It matters that these buses have, again, pre-corona numbers, like half the ridership of the New York City Transit buses. Like, this is how useless buses are in Paris. To the extent that you have a contiguous wide boulevard, I guess it's the ring that is where U2 and U6, not U2, M2 and M6 run, you don't need bus lanes there. There's M2 and M6. Is much of the issue. The Boulevard de Marchaux are contiguous. They need much more than buses. Most of them have tramway 3. I can see a case for building a metro line the entire way, replacing T3. Haussmann should have been run out of the country in 1850. I don't remember whether he should have been run out of the country. Let's check. Let's investigate this. Haussmann should direct to. Am I misspelling his name? Oh, it redirected me to something. Okay. So he was prefect of Paris in 53, yeah. So he should have been run out of the city in 53, and the people should have risen together as one and thrown away the parasite Napoleon III when he did his auto coup in 52. Yeah, you can do all traffic metering. You can do a lot of operational improvements. They can take those 11 kilometers an hour buses and get them back to 13, maybe 14 kilometers an hour. They can't get them to a speed in which people will voluntarily ride the bus. That's the big problem. In Berlin, I don't remember the average speed of a bus. I think the tramways average 18. T3, I think, averages 18 as well. So 18, things start looking okay, maybe, but like you can turn 11 to something a little bit higher. You can, and you can maybe sometimes squeeze more ridership out of it, but it's not gonna be a very large change. Robert Moses was a terrible human being. Robert Moses was serving venal pieces of shit at the state level who were mostly just doing, government that at the time was considered normal and today would be viewed as extreme clientelism. I mean, obviously much of it is viewed as normal in New York today, but New York is extremely clientelist. Napoleon III was a fucking dictator. A fucking dictator who started a war that he had no way of winning and that led the new country of Germany to tear pieces of the country away. That's the difference. Anyway, I bring all this stuff about Paris because Paris only has one feature that I think is truly atypical, and that is how tightly drawn city boundaries are. Usually there's more annexation of suburbs. In the case of Paris, the lack thereof is because of the aforementioned snobbishness. And then probably the best time to have annexed would have been right after World War II, because there were a lot of governance reforms involved. I think maybe that's when Greater London was created, right? Before that, I think it was maybe the County of London, but then Greater London is an actually coherent piece of government is, as I understand it, post-war, right? Um, and this is something that Paris chose not to do, even though over time a lot of the governance aspects of Paris have become parts of Ile-de-France, or for example, the Paris Police Prefecture is not just the city, it's the city and the Petite Couronne, so Hauts-de-Seine, Seine-Saint-Denis, and Val-de-Marne, but that's a state organ. So state organs that are responsible for governing the city often also include the suburbs, but the municipality is like this. This is snobbishness, and in the Cold War this was amplified by the fact that the suburbs were disproportionately working class. So they were working class to the point of supporting communism. This is why you see a lot of things named after the Soviet Union in parts of Seine-Saint-Denis. These were like committed communists who thought that, you know, the Soviet Union liberated everyone. Like the kind of people who would sing Bella Ciao and act like it was like an important song of resistance. Way more people killed, way more Nazis singing the Star Spangled Banner or whatever shit that they would sing in the UK. Would that be God? Would that have been just God Save the King, or would they have actually done the cringing and go full Rule Britannia, or the Internationale? Like, I mean the Soviet Union, Internationale. Like, it's not like so part of it is an entire like rewriting history to make the partisans much more important than they were. But also they named things after Soviet battles. Like, this is where there's a Stalingrad station. Like, it's a lot of it is people specifically doing this to kind of signal their support for communism in the Parisian suburbs. So it acquired not just urban snobbishness, which the state could overrule from time to time, but also a kind of regime support element. Yeah, sure. The City of London is not part of it. Oh, Arpit, can I speak to Grand Paris Express? Yeah. So Grand Paris Express is Grand Paris Express is kind of an attempt to expand the urban core. So in Paris, this is not a good map for this because this only has the current lines and they're not very clear. So give me a moment, please. Let's see if Open Railway Map has this, and when it doesn't, I'm going to let's just start Googling this, because if I check Open Railway Map, I know that they're not great for metros. Like the color, for some reason they have poor color contrast. Like they chose a color scheme that creates poor color contrast. Okay, so this is just Grand Paris Express. It does not depict the metro or the RER. You know something? This is where Alexander Rapp's maps might be best. So Grand Paris Express is best understood as a way of trying to further blur the city-suburb line by building much more suburb-to-suburb transport. Much of this is something that's actually really good. So this is the current system, and they're trying to. So first of all, okay, so this is already part of the project that just opened. What I mentioned before about M14. This is recent. Like, it did not exist when I lived there. This section of M14. They're also doing an expansion here. So essentially, they did some radial expansions of M14 that got bundled into this, but the rest is circumferential and in the suburbs. So M15 is going to be a ring roughly at this radius. M16, because they were indecisive about the but the eastern bit. So this is M15, and M16. It was because they weren't sure which route to build in the east. In the west, it's very easy; it has to go through La Défense. And then in the east, they weren't sure whether to build it at comparable radius or at larger radius. So 15 is tighter radius, 16 is something like this. wider radius. And then 17 is some suburb to airport shit that is just another airport line that's not very useful. M18 is circumferential, I think something like this, like here to here, mostly because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of urban snobbishness toward the suburbs, partly about income, but just some of it is just city suburbs, same as the attitudes of New York City toward New Jersey. But the richer suburbs in the West have their own kind of snobbishness, and they wanted to be part of the program, so they included M18, which is something like this. It's unpopular among transit advocates in the region because it is very high cost per rider. On numbers from maybe 2018 or something like that, they were projecting, I think, 35 or 36,000 euros per weekday rider. Today's money, probably we're talking $60,000-ish per rider. It's like comparable to Second Avenue subway phase 2, which is happening, but it's happening in a city that it can't build, whereas in Paris, I mean, like the extensions of M14, I think, are like 1/3 that cost per rider. But that's not exactly a matter of urban expansion. That's like how they're trying to fit transit into a city that's rather contiguous. A city that is not viewed as monocentric, but is very strongly centered around the city. Not a small central business district within the city, which is kind of the American way, but the European way is that you work in the city. The job concentration within Paris is comparable to or even more than the most centralized American cities. That would be New York or San Francisco or honestly Boston as well. At the scale of the size of Paris, so about 100 square kilometers. Now, obviously, if you zoom into the town to the size of Midtown, there's nothing in Europe, not even in London, with a job concentration of Midtown in 4 square kilometers. But at the scale of the size of the municipality of Paris, it's actually very strongly centered. And again, it's something that's viewed as a negative thing in European urbanism. But the city keeps acquiring these suburbs. And note, by the way, something important that, as I said at the beginning, that Paris is very about, should the périph' be torn down? I mean, I hate cars, so I will say yes, but nobody's talking about that. The teardowns that they're doing are within the city, so things like, there used to be a freeway on the Seine that is now a promenade. So they're doing teardowns of things within the city. Anne Hidalgo's ideology is kind of degrowth-ish, to the point that when the city lost population during Corona, she viewed it as a positive thing because, hey, people are moving to more space in the suburbs. The suburbs don't have more space than the city. The suburbs have less built-up density, but they don't. But apartment size per capita in Paris is more than in Seine-Saint-Denis, for example. More than Val-de-Marne, I think about the same as Olysane. No, it's just kind of like new left degrowth snobbishness, in which cars are viewed as negative for their impact on the local community. Whereas Ile-de-France writ large is not thinking that way. It will build trains, it will not demolish car infrastructure. So anyway, but again, all of this is completely normal in a city that, again, it's very famous and is viewed as like an urbanist dream. But in this case, it's rather typical. Again, excepting the lack of annexations, which is like a little bit of atypical snobbishness plus a very specific Cold War context of when it would have happened. Whereas in London, it was okay because there was no Communist Party for people in East London to vote for, and in Berlin, the annexation happened in 1920, and so that is something I think is fairly random, and like hell, in Berlin we have the Ring as kind of it's a much smaller, it's a much weaker dividing line. Like, I don't think people who live right outside the ring have the mentality of, I live outside the ring, not in the center of the city, whereas people who live here or here absolutely have that mentality in Ile-de-France. But people do use that as an informal boundary of inner versus outer city in Berlin. Like, central city snobbishness toward the suburbs is not atypical, sadly. Oh, hey Toronto. Yeah, a little bit. Only in the context of LA having, LA is kind of atypical in the US in how it does not have poverty donuts. Like, how it does not have the mentality in which, not mentality, the pattern in which you have a rich city center surrounded by poverty, which is in turn surrounded by middle class suburbs. But no, much of this, and of course, it's not the European pattern; it's an American pattern. And in Europe we have again these kind of standard patterns in the way that if you were to ask me what an average European or maybe average Western European governance system is, so like, what is the healthcare system? And obviously, I mean, there are differences, but I could kind of outline to you a kind of average European public healthcare system or average European pattern of how education is funded, or how higher education works, or the average European pattern of intercity rail. And I mean, yeah, there are better and worse places. There are places where it depends on what your priorities are. But there is kind of an average pattern, and the same is true of an average urbanist pattern. And Paris is in some ways the global average pattern, in that there's the city, it accretes suburbs in all directions, some richer than others, but the built-up area is rather symmetric. There are parks, but the parks are kind of like surrounded by gray. It's like patches of green surrounded by patches of gray. So there are no green belts. The metropolitan area of Paris is almost entirely contained within one contiguous built-up zone. Now, there are commuters who live beyond that, like Louvre. You can kind of see it's isolated because farmland. There's an RER station here. Yeah, this is the commuter suburb of Paris. I don't know how many people ride this. I have this data because I have data for all of the RER stations. But I'm not even gonna look. Like, just by knowing anything about this location, yeah, suburb. But that's not typical. Usually, it's contiguous in Paris, and again, that's kind of typical pattern. It's certainly the typical American pattern. There are practically no green belts in the United States. The one in Portland, Oregon, is very well known, and it's atypical, and even there, it is not like nearly as tight as some things that happen in Germany or Israel, or we're going to talk about some in the UK. So when you mean lack of poverty rings, like, LA absolutely has areas of concentrated poverty. They just don't have a poverty ring. They're very large patches rather than rings. Like, it's not the income pattern is very different from the lack of a strong city center, because, for example, Philadelphia has a weak city center, and it has kind of more traditional Rust Belt, poor city, outside the gentrified core, middle class suburbs pattern. Like, usually what happens is, and I think this is why American cities have weaker centers than European ones, beyond, again, a few blocks of high-rises, is exactly this. In Paris, the middle class can live in the city or in the suburbs, and again, it's west shifted in both cases, never uniformly, by the way. Nation, where I lived, is not a rich area, but I would characterize it as middle class, and even in the European sense. So it's maybe a little bit poorer than average for Paris, but the average is dragged up by the 16th. So in a room in which there are 6 squatters, 2 baristas, myself, and Bill Gates, my income is well below the average in the room. My income is also the second highest in the room. But it is also below average. So the 12th is not, so the 12th arrondissement is kind of like, and it's not the second richest or anything, it's probably median, but like there are poorer parts of Paris, roughly the 18th, 19th, 20th. It's like this section. And the 13th, as well to an extent. But here it's rather middle class. But the point is that there is much more of an urban middle class. And again, there is a suburban middle class. And some of them are snobs who think that public transit is beneath them, but that's not the norm. It is a norm, but it's not the norm, if that makes sense. What do I mean by a norm versus the norm? Some norms are just norms, right? I mean, there's the norm that you, let's say, form a relationship and get married. And it used to be also that it's heteronormative, and at this point, yeah, most people are straight, but it's expected that if you're queer, you do the same thing. If you're gay or lesbian, same sex, it's called homonormativity. So that's the norm in the sense that the alternatives are considered very weird. Now, if you want to talk about it in like a very, let's call it silly sense, having a dog is a norm, having a cat is a norm. There are dog people and cat people, it's understood. Or if there are, or depending on sports, right? So maybe in the United States, I guess, the norm is to, especially if you're male, to watch American football. And I think it's like, and I think at this point it's not baseball or football. It's just football and maybe other things. But and it probably support the home team. But in New York, first of all, New York is a much more baseball centric. But in New York in baseball, it can be Yankees or Mets, and these are both norms. So in the same way, and in countries that follow the global norm that you watch football, not American football, like you have a choice often of what team to root for. Like like if you're Turkish, you almost certainly have strong opinions about Fenerbahce, Galatasaray, and Beşiktaş, and I would say that all 3 of them are norms. They're not the norm, but they are norms. Now, yeah, in the United States, the urban middle class was traditionally not the norm. The norm was suburban middle class. I think it's changing, not just in New York. But yeah, you're right that New York is atypical in that norm exists more than elsewhere. Although again, it's like even in New York, suburbanization is somewhat expected, and the difference between, let's say, New York and Chicago and this exists. It's not night and day. In Europe, urban middle class is a norm, as is suburban middle class. And often it becomes a culture war issue, in the same way that, Fenerbahce versus Galatasaray is. Or what, Man U versus Liverpool versus Arsenal, and what's the 4th big team in England? It's Liverpool, Man U, Arsenal, Chelsea. like support. You probably like have strong opinions about these teams if you follow, English football. And so the point is, because of the inheritance of an urban middle class, it's much easier for businesses to keep locating in the city. Usually what happens with job sprawl is in the same direction as where the rich people live. Not for nothing, in Paris, where does job sprawl go? Again, there's less of it than in the United States, but it exists. Where does it go? It goes in all directions, but much more west, La Défense, than in the other directions. Like, yeah, sure, they built Marne-la-Vallée, tons of jobs here, but they're much lower end jobs than what's available in the West. So this is a much lower end job sprawl cluster than La Défense. And of course, La Défense is not the only West of Paris job cluster. There are things like Cergy and whatnot, and Poissy. So it's so generally the jobs migrate in the direction of high-end retail, which follows high-end residences. In New York, that's been blocked partly because Robert Moses was in favor of the very traditional live in suburbs, work in city model. So as far as he was involved, for example, on Island, there were no suburban business districts set up. So the job sprawl in New York tends to be out of state. Maybe also White Plains counts, but much more Jersey than in-state. And a part of it is just the transportation difficulties between the suburbs, just because of the water boundaries. Whereas the Seine is not a significant obstacle to modern bridging. The Thames, I guess, if you're like here, then there's a difficulty of getting between Kent and Essex. But this is bridged, and this is not even. This is like the M25 ring. And because it's not the norm to have bridges over shipping channels, the port got moved here. I mean, that's on why it got moved, because larger ships want to be further down the river. But also the bridge clearances are a concern. And so that's, I think, what's blocked job sprawl in New York. Not for nothing, the other places with high job concentrations in the city center in the United States are Boston and San Francisco. San Francisco very divided by water. Boston less so, but much more so than, for example, Chicago, or DC, or Philadelphia. And yeah, so the pattern in Paris is, I mean, so yeah, there's the income pattern, but the residential sprawl pattern is blob of gray. And yeah, there are patches of green inside the blob of gray. But that's kind of the most common thing globally. Again, it's the standard American pattern. Of course, the American pattern would be much farther away gray because it's much more auto-oriented. And in Paris, it's very transit-oriented sprawl. The thing I just showed you with Marne-la-Vallée, that was built simultaneously with it was like, this is job sprawl on top of a commuter train that I guarantee you a very large majority of the workers here don't use. Although, very large does not mean overwhelming. Like, a pretty hefty minority of the people who work here do take the LL. That's a difference with, let's say, an American edge city where 0% of the workers get their free public transportation. And that matters. Now, there are other models than contiguous blob of gray, and so the one kind of like planners in theory like the most is fingers. I don't know how clearly you can see the fingers on Google Earth right now, but there are supposed to be 5 fingers of gray alongside the ray lines. It's called the finger plan. And it's not a hunger plan, it's a finger plan. Hunger plan is something very different. And so the finger plan is, again, it is strips of gray along transportation corridors. It's rail rather than road, because roads are limited by capacity more than by speed, and therefore it doesn't, like if you build far away from the road, it doesn't really matter. Like it's not going to really add to travel time or to transportation costs, because what matters is how much human mass fits into the cars that can get people to their jobs. That's kind of the limit. Like trains have way more capacity than cars. Trains also require way more planning capacity, and also the range from a train station is much less than from a freeway exit, because you walk, maybe possibly you bike, but probably you walk to the train. You drive in your car to the freeway is the big difference. So it's mostly a transit-oriented system, where again, fingers, and then much less development in between, far from the train stations, far from the train lines. It's not actually that common. I mean, it exists in Copenhagen. If you squint, you can see it in a bunch of other places, but not that many. I think Stockholm kind of does it, in the sense that like it's very clear how much TOD there has been in Stockholm next to the T-bana. Yeah, and when you have areas that are undeveloped, they often will keep them undeveloped until the train gets there. I'm sure there's demand for housing even far from the train, but there's far more demand for housing near the train, so that's where they try to concentrate development in Stockholm County. When I vlog, it must have been, and one of the things to point out is that Copenhagen is not a place of very high transit model split. So I don't know the model split, but I know how much ridership the S-Tog has, how much ridership the metro has, and I mean, from my point of view, having lived in Stockholm, neither of these numbers is especially impressive. Hi, Huri. Slagging on Copenhagen. There's the entire culture war between, and there's also the culture war between the metro and the light rail, because there's the German-style mentality of, oh my god, why did we build a metro? Why didn't we build light rail that would average 18 kilometers an hour? Then we would at least be able to take some lanes away from cars in a city where the boulevards are not especially wide, and as a result, I mean, some are, but same as in Paris, that's not like what the system is made of. Like, it's not like New York or generally American cities where you have a connected network of all wide or almost all wide streets. Like in Copenhagen, sure, you can do something about this boulevard, but fundamentally, like, this is how you're trying to get to this is the city center you're trying to get into. Yeah, you can take lanes from cars here. Now, I don't drive. Now, from my understanding of how drivers feel on streets like this, nobody drives on these roads unless they either absolutely have to or feel like they have to because they denigrate public transit, or are just masochistic. So, like, sure, an intercity driver who has a hotel to get to here and already rented a car, yeah, sure, they're driving, but they're driving even if you're like taking away some of these streets away from cars. So that's kind of the mentality. It's a very German mentality as well, and here it's being applied into a city with a center that is already very hostile to cars and also hostile to surface transit. So yeah, there's a lot of intermodal warfare in Copenhagen. Yeah, in Copenhagen, they set up the S-Tog in the 1930s. Like Copenhagen, and like in that sense, is the second city in the world to have built a German style. I don't want to say second city in the world to have built an S-Bahn because Tokyo exists. But let's call it the second city in Europe to have had a recognizable S-Bahn after Berlin. Maybe third because Hamburg should also count. Okay, it's Hamburg, Berlin, and then Copenhagen. So they did do the S-Bahn thing. It's just, I'm looking at the right here, and yeah, it's not terrible, but Stockholm has a much stronger system. And yeah, there's something that turns out to be somewhat of a finger plan there, but it's nothing as coordinated. And I brought this up when I vlogged about Eastern European urban rail, which was over 2 years ago because I did it either just before or just after Russia began its special military operation, which took 3 days. In fact, Russia has been in complete control of Ukraine right up to here since the end of February 2022, where communist planning, you would expect it to have a high degree of integration between transportation and housing development because the state did both, but it actually didn't. Cave, for example, is a rather contiguous block. So Cave is like Paris with fewer suburbs. Like at this level of zoom, just by seeing the green and the gray, you're not going to be able to tell where the Cave metro is. So you could finger plan, but yeah, the actual small city finger plan is not something that is that much of a smashing success. And in big cities, you build enough lines that you have a very large contiguous blob of gray. Paris is technically a finger plan as well. It's just, it's large, so if you do contiguous patches of gray, or like a blob of gray, then you're never that far away from a commuter train. I think Warszawa might be a little bit easier, but only a little bit, and they only have the 2 metro lines. But the rest is like trams. The German mentality. Yeah, Stuttgart and München are very different. Actually, we can talk about Stuttgart and München. It's a good transition. The German mentality is that in the history of Germany, after World War II, as in everywhere else in the, I want to say developed world, but you would say Western Bloc, because this is something that Austria and Switzerland did not do, the trams were removed to make the city car-friendlier. Now, in the United States, the trams were removed and replaced by buses. In France, the trams were removed, and later there would be either light rail, or sometimes bringing back some of the trams as in possible, or new metros, often light metros, like in Lille. In Germany, what they did was they buried the trams. They turned the trams into Stadtbahn systems, where the central section is in tunnel, or in the case of one of the lines in Köln, on a bridge. Actually, maybe 2 of the lines in Köln. Is it 1 or 2 lines in Köln where the Great Separated Trunk is actually a bridge on the river? Then farther out, the line would branch into several surface branches. I said branch. The line would split into several surface branches. In Köln, the largest city with the system, because it's the 4th largest city proper in Germany, Berlin, Hamburg and München are all bigger city proper, but they have full U-Bahn systems. So Köln is the biggest Stadtbahn, so it's much more complex with like lines transitioning between different trunks. Whereas in, for example, Hannover or Dortmund, it's like 3 lines in city center in tunnel, and then they branch in both directions on the surface. Frankfurt, kind of like that, but it's also kind of more complex. Stuttgart, I'm forgetting whether it's 2 or 3 trunks. I think Essen is 2. 2 bridges with Stadt. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, the effective, yeah. In Stuttgart you can do, yeah, Stuttgart is very different. And so is München. So all of this is post-war. So the point is, because they buried the trams, anti-car activists in Germany who would dominate what the Greens especially think about when they think about transportation. They think that U-Bahns are effectively a conspiracy to create more space in the city for cars. I've heard people tell me, unironically, that trams are better than subways, first of all because they're cheaper. That is the only statement that I've ever seen Germans as activists make that suggests any cost concern. Certainly I've never seen any interest in why German construction costs were historically higher than Nordic ones. I don't think they are any longer, but that's an artifact of maybe the last 6 years. Nor have I seen any concern with why they're higher than Southern European construction costs. To the contrary, people say, oh, in Switzerland they don't spend so much money, let's build fewer tunnels, when Switzerland builds more tunnels than Germany. So first of all, it's kind of a fake cost concern, and second, they say, oh, and if you build a tramway, you also take away space from cars, and that's great. Sure, fine. Half of Germany does not live in the cities. Like I'm forgetting how far you need to go down to have half of Germany live in cities. It's either, I think, all the cities with like maybe 100,000 people or more, maybe are half-ish of the population, or it is the metro areas that are on high-speed trains. So not all of the cities, but also some suburbs. Or I think either of these is about half the population. The rather cynical and very gadflish transportation researcher John Adams, not the American president, this is a guy who might be still alive. I think he's very old. Yeah, this guy. Yeah, so Professor Emeritus. Yeah. So this guy, the guy who points out that after seat belts were mandated due to risk compensation, there was a noticeable one-time bump in pedestrian traffic fatalities because drivers became less careful. This guy said, and this must have been 20 years ago, a program that aimed to reduce automobile dependency would do the most to restrain the expansion of highways where cars are used the most outside the cities, not restrain cars within the cities where they are already extremely inconvenient to use. He quotes Blair administration officials, it's how old that is, saying, "We are not against cars, we merely wish that Brits left them in the garage sometime." And then, quoting this guy, Adams goes, perhaps instead of going on a road building program, and he lists the roads that were being built in non-urban Britain at the time, they should go on a garage building program. You mean Zürich U-Bahn, not Zürich S-Bahn. Yeah, the U-Bahn in Zürich did not happen because of left-wing degrowth sentiments. The idea was that the city was too large, so they shouldn't build subways because subways would further enlarge and densify the city. Same opposition Switzerland wouldn't do it grounds to the second S-Bahn tunnel in Munich, because of course Zurich did build 2 S-Bahn tunnels. And yeah, so this is the mentality in Germany. The mentality in Germany is that it's a very consumption-oriented thing where you try to make your city center environment as car-free as possible and don't care about the rest. This is why Berlin is not building the U8 extension to Märkisches Viertel. The Greens are against it. Die Linke is against it. SPD wouldn't push the issue because it is viewed as place-based policy for Märkisches Viertel, and that's just part of some politicking, and if they don't have a growth plan to build more housing there, because maybe the area already has high-density housing, then no need. And now there's CDU and SPD, except CDU has this bullshit, CDU and FDP have this bullshit Technologie Offenheit mentality in which, well, maybe we shouldn't build U-Bahns, maybe we should look at flying cars or hydrogen or something. I think they were looking at the maglev program, Berlin CDU. Like, not high-speed maglev, like I think urban maglev or some shit. Zurich and Tokyo are very different. Tokyo is contiguous blob with a very strong center like Paris. Zurich, yeah, it's a strong center, but they are ashamed of it. So the entire German way of urbanism, and this is something they also say in Switzerland and in Austria, and in Israel, by the way, is distinction between city and satellite cities. In Berlin, by the way, Berlin's atypical, and Berlin is atypical because it hasn't had much growth since the war, because division, removal of so many professional services from the city to Frankfurt, Bonn, and Hamburg. But it's something very obvious if you look at Frankfurt. Frankfurt is a city of 700 or 800,000 people. Berlin is a city of 3.8 million. The metro areas are probably about the same size. Frankfurt, look at this. Yeah, there's the city, and yeah, you can start to look at some contiguous suburbs, maybe, but it's much less contiguous. There's literal farmland in the way. These are commuter suburbs of Frankfurt. They're not contiguous. Yeah, maybe Hanau is kind of contiguous, but it's not even much of a finger plan. Not when the train goes through a forest, and the connection and the gray connects away from the train. That's much more post-war. München is somewhere in between the Berlin model and the Frankfurt model. So this is much more typical of German urbanism. It is, it deliberately aims at keeping a distinction between the cities and the suburbs, often on entirely aesthetic grounds. Israel does the same thing. Tel Aviv does have contiguous suburbs. Usually, traditionally people would mention 5. Givatayim, here, Ramat Gan, which is here. So Ramat Gan is kind of like this, Givatayim is here. This is still part of Tel Aviv. Bnei Brak, which is sui generis because Hardee's. Bat Yam, and Cholon. Now, at this point, Petach Tikva is also contiguous. Petach Tikva is also is kind of the, let's call it the New Jersey of Tel Aviv. It's like the place that people look down on because it's in the suburbs. But to the north, you can kind of see how the suburbs are not quite contiguous. So this is within Tel Aviv. This entire area is called Ramat Aviv. This area has a bunch of names. I think of it as Ramat HaChayal, but Ramat HaChayal is literally just the edge city here where a lot of tech is. Like these are different neighborhood names. Like District 1, District 2. Think about it that way. and the center is districts 3 through 6. Ramat HaSharon is separated by a little bit of unbuilt area. Herzliya, same thing. Wealthy neighborhoods, very wealthy suburbs, very wealthy neighborhoods. All of this probably would have been developed in a more normal setting, but because of this kind of urbanism and this ideology that these cities should not merge for some reason or not lose their distinctiveness, this stays undeveloped. It's not even about transportation or anything like that. It's just kind of the weird aesthetic revulsion to the city visibly getting bigger. Which is kind of weird because Israel, unlike Germany, builds skyscrapers. There are more skyscrapers over 150 meters in Israel than in Germany. Israel has 9 million people, 9.5 million people. Israel has, Israel has 9.5 million and Germany 84. Yep. Ooh. Yeah, so, in Germany, the model is not formally greenbelty, and a lot of places just merged, like the Ruhr, like it's contiguously urban very much from, like in the Ruhr proper, so between Dortmund and Duisburg. Again, I mean, there are always random gaps, but there's still, you can draw a contiguous line entirely through built up things. From Dortmund, this is Essen already, and then keep going until you end up hitting, this is not Essen, this is Bochum. This is Essen already, apologies, so Bochum, Essen, and here you're hitting Mülheim, and then finally Duisburg. And you kind of see that there's still gaps at random places, but this is contiguous. I'm not sure how contiguous this is to Düsseldorf, but the notion that the Ruhr is the same region as Düsseldorf and Köln is more recent, whereas the idea of the Ruhr as a single region is like 100 years old, maybe more. So again, it's not a perfect kind of greenbelt thing, but also again, the Ruhr is contiguous from before greenbelts became a thing. But you do see cities that are surrounded by green rather than having a contiguous patch of gray, which is the norm in Asia, in the Americas, in parts of Europe, like again Paris. I think generally France works that way. Spain, same. In Spain, it's usually high density to the edge of the built-up area. Spain does not have the concept of like single-family suburbia. I mean, it has that, but much less so. To the point that Spain has the highest weighted density in Europe with 1 by 1 kilometer cells. So to make it comparable, to avoid doing things like census categories that differ by country. Spain is far and away the highest. Greece, number 2, separated by much from both number 1 and I forget who number 3 is because it's like a near tie between a bunch of countries. And then there's, I'm not sure if it's an English thing or a British thing or just a London thing, but there's the idea of green belts because of this, I think it's just a distinction between London and not London, where the Netherlands is even more like that. They're trying to keep the cities distinct. Whereas basically everyone who's trying to study metropolitan areas from a global perspective gave up and is viewing the entirety of Holland and Utrecht as a single metro area of like 7 million people. But obviously that's not how Dutch people think about it. Germans, by the way, don't either. Germany does have various definitions of metropolitan areas, but they're not. But it's nothing as systematic or consistent as the American metropolitan statistical area or the French urbain or the Japanese major metropolitan areas, to the point that usually there are a bunch of different definitions for different purposes. And kind of like the most systematic definition is just the extent of the verkehrsverbund, by which is obviously not comparable. It's not like an objective measure. It's just which governments ended up joining which verkehrsverbund. So, for example, Nuremberg has a very large one for its metro area size. No, the Ruhr's, yeah. I mean, yeah, and so in in London it's this idea that urban sprawl is bad. The city is bad it's kind of a class thing in the sense of aesthetics, where it's something that where the city is viewed as a negative thing. So in Germany, I don't know if we ever had the coal pollution that London had. Certainly it's not something that is in any kind of German urbanist social memory today. In German urbanist social memory, again, it's mostly trauma it's mostly trauma about the rapid spread of cars in the 30, 40 years after the end of the war, and leading to kind of a degrowth mentality toward the city, viewing growth as something that is inherently car-oriented. In London, it's not like that. In London, like the Garden City movement predates cars, like it's coal pollution. And the Americans got it from the Brits. Like the American Garden City ideas are things that got there through Britain, to the point that some of the people who implemented that, like Lewis Mumford, had his own ideas of like growth without cars. And he was rather anti-car, with the idea of like Radburn, which is that the cars are external to the community. So you build your very modernist housing project. You build it, Radburn or something. You build it. Do I want to wait for this load, or do I want to put it in? Yeah, it's in Farewell. Yeah, here. So this is rather modernist. Once this loads, you will see. Yeah, so you can see how so can you see how the street network here is not like a normal, like, contiguous grid? It's like something that's much more typical of suburbia. And the idea is that there's parking because the cars are how maybe you connect with the rest of the world, but you do not want cars in your neighborhood. Is the idea. And often that turned into suburban cul-de-sacs. And so but again, that's an American thing through Britain, where the cities were viewed negatively for reasons that were initially not about cars. They were either ethnic, so hostility to Jews and Italians in New York enclaves was a big part of it, which I guess is the equivalent of British classes in America. I don't think there has ever been a point in measured economic history, so the last 100 plus years, in which the United States was less economically unequal than Britain. Both countries were very unequal in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. Both became much more equal during and after World War II, the United Kingdom becoming far more equal than the United States ever did, and both underwent a large increase in inequality in the 80s and 90s. The United States kind of kept with that a little bit. The United Kingdom clawed back most of the increase in inequality under Maggie and John Major, under Blair Brown, and then a little bit under the new Tories, not through lifting. So Blair and Brown lifted the ban on Cameron and cap the top. Yeah, and so so part of it is the idea that you don't want to do growth in the capital because you should somehow balance the growth, and we just encountered this at a much smaller scale in Paris. This is not London being weird or the United Kingdom being weird. The idea that you should try to balance growth is something that is very common, often to comic extents in countries with big city, with big, let's call it city-province differences like France, but France also has much less. France and the UK have at this point the same Gini index, but there's notably more inter-regional inequality in the UK than in France. Like the London versus Wales, or London versus Birmingham, or London versus Yorkshire, income gaps are much wider than, let's say, Paris to... Maybe they're comparable to Paris to Cos, just because Cos is atypically poor, but they're much wider than Paris to, I don't know, Auvergne, or Limousin, or Poitou, or Poitou-Charentes, places like that. And there has been this idea of trying to rebalance growth, often through. So in Paris, they actually empowered the regions. So essentially, they gave the secondary cities some fiefdoms to play with. This is why Nantes is not part of. So this is a department now; it doesn't show the regions. Bretagne misses 20% of historic Bretagne. Bretagne was split into 5 departments. I don't remember their names. And when they formed the modern region, they took away the Nantes department to give it to make it the region for Rennes, and then they put Nantes in the same region as a bunch of unrelated departments to give Nantes its own hinterland to play with. And bear in mind, like the big example I know of like growth in a provincial region of France since World War II was completely independent of that. It's in Toulouse. Toulouse has one of the highest population growth rates of European metro areas, but that's just post-war rebound plus Airbus, and. Yeah, so in the UK, there was this kind of mentality against kind of melding the the city and the country, like melding on in the sense of like abolishing the distinction through making the city more country-like, but like making too much of the country be in or explicitly dependent on the cities. Yeah, I mean, sometimes don't have Lyon or Toulouse. Birmingham is substantially larger than any French secondary city. I think Metro Birmingham is almost the same size as Metro Lyon and Metro Marseille combined. Birmingham is much poorer. Yeah, Lyon and Toulouse have. I mean, part of it is the EU, but the UK was also in the EU. And Toulouse, sure, it got more union access out of it, but I mean, like, what the union made more accessible through Toulouse locally was Spain and Portugal. And yeah, I mean, Spain and Portugal are not nothing, but like, they're not the markets that are going to save you. I mean, Airbus does not live off of orders by International Airways, served by IAS, like the company that owns both British Airways and Iberia, because I guess they're too proud to say that they're the same company the way Air France and KLM openly tell you that they're the same company these days. And so it's a different situation. And yeah, Birmingham was kind of destroyed by the attempts to classify it into a have city and instead try to yeet money toward northern cities, like in Manchester, which by the era we're talking about, like 1960s, is already not doing well, or Liverpool, or cities of Yorkshire. North Spain industrial belt is not enough to make a city rich. The connections to Barcelona are nice. That's not why Toulouse has grown this much in the last 70 years. It's just it's a new economy kind of industrialization, in which often coal and steel oriented areas decline in favor of places that produce more complex goods like cars. So in Germany, it's a decline of the Ruhr in favor of southern Germany. Also the decline of Saxony. Saxony was very coal and steel oriented, but at the time that the decline happened, Saxony had a larger problem, which I, for the next 2 weeks, live within walking distance of. I'm about to move to a place that's not walking distance of the best known symbol of the problem of Saxony or Mecklenburg-Vorpommern for 45 years, and or Belgium has the same issue where coal and steel was Wallonia and it declined in favor of the more new economy, which again, it's industrial, it's not professional services. Professional services go in the central city, thank you very much. But these more complex goods, again, often it's cars, but it doesn't have to be, like machine parts, things like that, that are in the Flemish diamond. Flanders in general, but I mean in like Bruges is maybe we shouldn't call it Bruges, it's not a French city. Brugge is a tourist city. The wealth is really like this area, like it's like Flemish. It's historic Brabant, so Flemish Brabant, and the Antwerp region plus Ghent, I guess. Maybe Hasselt, I don't remember. And yeah, so likewise in France, it's been the decline of the north of like Nord-Pas-de-Calais, and the growth has been in Alsace, in Toulouse, and in places like Sophie Antipolis. No, the Ruhr. Yeah, so the Ruhr is doing much better. Yeah, so the Ruhr managed to do much better. So I mentioned before that France has less interregional inequality than the United Kingdom. Italy, I think, is comparable to the United Kingdom. It's kind of hard to say because in Italy it's not city provinces, it's north versus south. Now in Germany, one of the actuallys that they keep pointing to people who heard that neoliberalism failed to help East Germany, and they like show them the incomes in East Germany, and they show them how, and maybe I show them pictures from Leipzig or from present-day East Berlin. Germany has, among these 4 countries, the lowest extent of interregional inequality. Even with the rich West, poor East pattern, the East is 1/4, at this point, less than 1/4 of Germany. It's like 1/5 of Germany, and yeah, the incomes in the East are noticeably lower than in the West, but I can gerrymander at like 20% of any place that's poor. Yeah, Munich is especially wealthy, but London, for example, is atypically wealthy. Like as of when the Eurostat data, so it's called primary balance of income by nuts to regions. This is the same statistic that goes into So it's primary income of private households, but not to regions. Uh, and and this is, as I understand it, net. So this is income from market sources minus rent minus interest. So at ecological level, just because the landlords are almost always local, and that includes Deutsche Wohnen, like mostly Berlin based. These are download dataset in preview, proceed, click here because it's taking forever. This is the same statistic at ecological level as what Americans call median household income. I mean, it's average per capita in Americans, usually cited median per household, but it's income from market, it's income from work, as opposed to income from capital sources. And it has trouble loading for reasons that are partly, I mean, this is also, the preview is not working. Yeah, the Ruhr is in structural decline, but Köln is doing so much better than, let's say, Birmingham or Manchester. I mean, Germany spent a ton of money on this, and there are still grievances. There are still, I mean, you can totally find. I mean, the way it works is you go into these little places that vote AfD, and you interview people and you ask them why they voted AfD, and 9 of them will say, oh yeah, we need to make the country great again, like what Hitler did. And then you say, well, Hitler killed 6 million Jews, and they say, well, yes. And then there's the one person who interprets for the other 9 and says, well, there has been a lot of Besserwissi problem, and people lie about integration, and then most of the media will quote the 10th guy. Yeah, no, the Ruhr. What just happened that I tried to click that didn't? Oh, okay. Let's see if I managed to make. Oh, okay. With LibreOffice. Okay, the good thing is that the commas work well. OpenOffice is not always the best for this. Okay, so because it's all in things, okay. Item. Okay. So it's telling me what country I'm in. Maybe move my head to the other side if it's something that's on the right. So CZ obviously is Czechia. Problem is I will not remember the numbers for Czechia. So DE 29,700 and DE1. Which one is DE1? There's a. I used to remember this because sometimes I memorize silly things. Tables, graphs, and visualizations. Access URL. DE1 is Baden-Württemberg. Okay, that makes more sense. That explains why the numbers are so much higher. It could not have possibly been Berlin. That this is 33.2 and this is 29.7. So which one is the rich one? That would be Stuttgart, so DE11, 34.8. That might not be income net of rent and interest. That may be just straight per capita income. So multiply by about 1.4 to turn into dollars, into PPP dollars. Which one is going to be Munich, Oberbayern is 21. Yeah, this is, I think you need to multiply by 1.4 and make it an American per capita income, not an American household income, but that's fine. So yeah, this is how filthy rich Munich is. Do they have Britain? I don't think they have the UK. It would be UK, it would be under UK and not GB. Or maybe, wait, what? Oh, are you showing me more data? What are you doing? Okay, also I'm worried that this is also not per capita, this is also not in PPS, this is also not adjusted for living expenses, I think. Which is why we're seeing numbers that are kind of weird. Yeah, it's showing me all of the data at once, which is not what I wanted. Yeah, okay, SERO, yeah, not what I wanted. Yeah, is there, so yeah, you see, your HAB, this is per capita. Your MEO is GDP and non-GDP per capita, which is not your income. Do they have UK? No. Okay. This is what I was afraid of. When they had the UK, London, I think as of 2019, London was just behind Munich. So like Greater London had higher per capita income net of rent than Ile-de-France. Maybe about even with like Hamburg and Stuttgart and Frankfurt. And the UK is much below Germany. There's just less interregional inequality here than in the UK. And again, it's not because of urbanism, it's because of like how professional services were redistributed after the unit of measure, okay, unit of measure, purchasing power standard per inhabitant, thank you. This is in 2020 numbers, okay. Okay, that is the thing you multiply by 1.4. So in so Oberbayern is this. I think this might actually be primary balance. So income from, so at ecological level, income from work. Yeah, okay. So anyway, I bring all this up because, no, the UK has a segmented labor market, and often you have this mentality that it's good to segment the labor market because it yeets a little bit of something like professional services to poorer regions. But, I mean, the US does this as well, not consciously, but through excessive NIMBYism in rich regions, and like at a place where the federal government can't intervene because New York is perceived as not real America, and it's much higher inequality as a result, and like and all this matters. So it's people who think they're helping but are not, and they emphasize they think they're helping, like Jake Anbinder's entire thesis is that the NIMBYs in post-war America thought they were helping. Like they were not, like yeah, they were snobs and that affected how they viewed cities, but they were but they genuinely thought that development led to displacement. Like they were seeing Berkeley get less black, and they thought, oh, it's because of the high-end development. So it wasn't cynical, not earlier. Like these days it is, but the NIMBYism. But in the 60s and 70s, it was just the false belief that degrowth would lead to equality and not to the reverse. Which again, we see here as well. And of course in Britain, there's this idea that there's urban sprawl and it is bad, and you fight urban sprawl by having green belts to delineate this is the city, these are the suburbs. Now, people in these suburbs, these are suburbs of London. Like, I mean, it's that's why whenever you look at built-up area populations, Paris is more than London. And when you look at metro area populations, it's the other way around. Because in Paris, nearly all of the suburbs are contiguous with the city, and in London, they're not. And it doesn't make the city more transit-oriented to do it this way, because again, you have these stops on trains, they slow down the train, but you don't have population to slow down the roads. So the roads are less congested. Obviously, within the city, the roads are a nightmare, but that's not because of the green belt. Yeah, so for London, so London just needs more building in general. So yeah, turn all these row houses into nice single stair mid-rise buildings. Also, maybe don't have golf courses in the city right next to the tube. That's not the best use of land. Okay, I guess this is the northern line and it's kind of busy, but I don't think the Pick is especially busy. The Vic is very crowded, is overcrowded in the south, not in the north. So here, this should probably be, the buildings there should be much taller. It's kind of, the idea that tall buildings are bad because return with a V to tradition is often the problem. And yeah, the NIMBYs in the 60s and 70s made a killing through speculating unintentionally on the houses that they lived in, and then you tell them this, they will say, well, I'm house rich and income poor. And because, so in the United States it's especially bad because in the United States nobody ever thinks in terms of class analysis, because much of it was ethnicized. So people think in terms of, so people are absolutely capable of thinking in terms of snobbishness against ethnic whites or against actual racial minorities. But class as in source of income is not something Americans think about as a distinction, and as a result, people say things like middle class homeowner, homeowners who are income poor, as if the expression middle class does not literally mean someone who derives most of their income from like professional work. Like the doctors of like mid-Victorian London and things like that. So so people who call themselves, who say I am income poor but house rich, don't understand that in Europe they are viewed as, it's not a Marxist lecture, it's a European complaining about Americans lecture. No, but I mean, no, like source of income does matter. Yeah. So in like, it's kind of weird that the UK is kind of Americanizing on this, because I don't perceive the UK left in other ways as very Americanized. Like, I know, like anti-war people, for example, in the UK, used very different language from anti-war Americans, and to this day still do. Like, I don't think anti-war Brits, like people who protested the Iraq War 21 years ago, didn't do the American populist thing of kind of portraying the American soldier as like oppressed by the system, which is very common to how American anti-war mentality works. Okay, maybe now. I mean, again, what I saw from anti-war Brits and Americans 21 years ago was that anti-war Brits So like remember, anti-war Americans watch Vietnam War movies in which Vietnamese characters don't have any speaking parts or only have like one line and they're like prostitutes, and consider these to be anti-war films. Like the American anti-war idea is entirely about the perspective of the killer, and again, it's a very populist thing, like "Born in the USA," the song, and because Britain did not do these things in the Cold War. I guess I mean, with the Suez Crisis, but I mean, let's compare how many people the UK killed and how many the US killed. It's very different. Um, yeah, fair. Yeah. So so anyway, I just bring this up because for NIMBYism, it really is a matter of source of income. And if you think of classes, well, obviously not kind of like a two-class system because it's bullshit, but if you think of it in terms of, yeah, I mean, the, no, but I mean, for NIMBYism versus NIMBYism, it really is people who are middle class in what I call the normal sense, and they really mean the European sense, of people who whose income derives from a skilled profession, um, and that's the core of NIMBYism. And the core of NIMBYism is people whose income is passive but landed, so not people who are playing the stock market, people who are speculating on the house that they own. That's like the point I was trying to make, and it's not. And again, that's not a Britishism. That's an everyoneism. And this is why YIMBY versus NIMBY politics is such a 21st century, let's call it. I want to say first world, really Western thing, because the distinction between like these like between the middle class and like mass petty gentry is very modern. Like it is not something that it's not a distinction that made sense in 1900. I don't think it's a distinction that makes sense in a developing country today. So anyway, so anyway, the point is that you have these models. I was starting to talk about models of sprawl at the beginning, and in a way, the lack of green belt is normal. The green belt is weird, and it's concerning growth for environmental and social goals at which it is 100% failing. Bear in mind the other restrictions are not unique to the UK. Again, there are NIMBYs in France too. Paris only started building more housing in Ile-de-France 10 years ago, and the city builds very little. Snobs stay snobs. Degrowthers stay degrowther. And Germany is about as NIMBY as the UK, unfortunately. And and I don't know to what extent that relates to the extent of housing construction, just because Austria and Switzerland do the same thing and build a lot more housing than Germany does. Israel does the same thing where like cities are trying not to merge, and Israel builds a lot, and Israel builds a lot of housing in Israel, not just in the settlements, which are not in Israel. So it's like maybe ideologies that, like urbanist ideologies that tend to correlate but are not in perfect correlation with each other. And again, there are weird things like not letting the cities be contiguous blobs of gray, but that's not the only thing. Like like models of like a strong city center, yeah, they're normal. I think they should be normative. With like contiguous blobs, but there are other things that need to happen. Yeah. Okay, I really like this term. I really like grassfall. Thank you, positive sum. Um, um, Germany, Germany builds more than the UK, maybe. So, I think that London builds less than the main cities of Germany. Germany also has weaker demographics, i.e. lower birth rates. I think at this rate, immigration here is at higher rates, but it's not consistent. Like the US is fairly consistent immigration. Here it's in waves. So there was the Syrian wave, the Ukrainian wave. Like it's not ever like in terms of like, let's say Canada or Australia having like aggressive migration targets that they hit. So, and I think it matters because it means that it's not something that people can rely on happening, which is a big difference between, I guess the most comparable example to Germany would be early 20th century France. Low birth rates, leading to acceptance of more immigration. Okay, in Germany I don't think it's they lead, just they happen to be the same. I don't think people in Germany understand that immigration is good for Germany. They think of it as a burden, but it is good for Germany. Yeah, I mean, there's backlog, but I mean, France has a backlog that's just starting to clear. Germany's housing system, it depends on where in Germany. In Berlin, it started running into trouble not long before I moved here. Like if I'd moved here in 2017, when I was thinking of moving here, then I would have probably been paying 2/3 as much for rent as I was in my first year here. Like Berlin housing prices are Berlin rents are rising very fast. They're rising from a very low base, but they're rising very fast. And again, it's like not even maybe it started in the mid 2010s, but like mid as in 16, 17, not as in 13, 14. But anyway, are there other questions? No, I know that there's a giant backlog. It's just, usually if you start working on clearing a backlog, you will see prices cool. This is what happened in Stockholm. Rents did noticeably cool for the few years after I left because they started building more housing. And yeah, they have a backlog, and yeah, the rents are insane and they're worse than here, but I mean, you can see the difference. Like you can see that, like the difference in rates of change, not in overall levels. Yes, okay, so Berlin is rather, actually it's a nice way to do this blob. Berlin is atypically blobby again, but that's because it's old. Leipzig, kind of vaguely, but also old. But Halle is kind of in its orbit. Honestly, separate city. Let's find Frankfurt. And you can kind of see that Frankfurt has things that are like sub-centers, like Wiesbaden, Darmstadt. It's not contiguous the way Berlin is. It's a big difference. The circle tool. Oh, how many people there are within a... Flüsse sehen. Okay, I kind of don't want to play with this right now, and the main reason I don't want to play with this right now is that you can kind of see how slow everything is loading. Like if you want to change this to the proportion who are foreigners, you saw how long this took this to load. It should not take this long. So obviously foreigners go where the jobs are, not where the housing is cheap. So Frankfurt, Nürnberg, Mannheim, we're seeing here in Köln. When it loads here, you will see how in Berlin the numbers are lower than in, for example, Hamburg. Like Hamburg, I was only in Hamburg for a couple hours, but it was visibly a lot less white than Berlin is. Okay, can you bother me again about above ground construction costs? Yes, you can. I mean, we have that in the database. I mean, we have construction costs for we have so okay, so here we have more than 20%, and like this is like Köln, Mitte, and then it drops to 8 to 20. Hamburg, I mean, I guess it might be the same absolute size at 20% plus, but Hamburg is a smaller city. And Munich will have. I don't know. Like, I think you see how Munich is 20% for almost the entire city. I don't know why my internet's loading slow whenever I stream. I clearly have the bandwidth to stream this, but for some reason things are still also delayed, not sure why. Anyway, yeah, so above ground rail construction costs, like, we don't have a good light rail database, and if you talk to Eric and Elif, we might do one. But it's a lot of work finding all these little tramways. Elevated lines, yeah, we have. Are there other questions before we break? Yeah, balance of primary income. It's net of rent and interest. I'm really sad that they kicked the UK out of this because, or the UK left because, no, the UK left the EU. I'm also sad about that. The UK left Eurostat because it would be really interesting to do these comparisons there, to keep being able to do the comparisons. Switzerland, same thing. I'm kind of sad that it's not there so that I could see exactly how much richer Switzerland is than the Union. Because I suspect in PPS the difference is not that massive. Like, it's not in Norway. This is Oslo in PPS. So 27.6, which is, I mean, okay, there are parts of Austria richer than anywhere in Austria, but Ile-de-France, for example, is richer than Oslo. Hamburg, richer than Oslo. Darmstadt. So this is called Darmstadt. This is because for people who don't know, Hesse historically was separated into two separate. The region of Hesse was historically two states. One anchored on Kassel, one on Darmstadt. And Frankfurt was neither. It was a free city. And then when Prussia conquered the rest of Germany, for all intents and purposes, I think one of them became a province of Prussia, and so was Frankfurt, and the other stayed independent. And then after World War II, they turned into a single state called Hesse. And then they divided into three sub-regions: Darmstadt, Kassel, and Mittelgießen. Darmstadt is the one with Frankfurt. And as you can see from the fact that these three regions average to this, Darmstadt has way more people than the rest. No, Brexit's entirely fine. I mean, I don't know, the vibes I like are on Keith negotiating, rejoining, in a Euro federalism, the UK going on the Euro, things like that. EU army, important. But anyway, if there are no further questions, thank you all for watching. Sorry about things loading slowly. I will see you once again, maybe in 4 days. Starmer believes in whatever the polls say. The man called for a second referendum and then stopped. Anyway, I will see you in either 4 days or in a week. He believes in being very cautious to the point that when he's 20 points ahead, he keeps saying nothing. And then everyone can write fanfic about how he's going to govern until he wins the election in 8 months. So anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you once again in the next one, either Saturday or Tuesday. So, topic TBD. So, ciao ciao.